two different things.
Thank you, Mr. Jobs.
Just a thought.
No, thank you. Ms. Kim.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for holding this study, interim hearing on this. I think this clearly speaks to the reason why we're here today during recess, having our hearing to really study the necessity of addressing these three particular bills, which should have been voted on. I mean, we wanted to vote on these bills when these bills were heard early this year, but we didn't. But we all agree that these are important issues, and these three bills that we'll be hearing in the first panel does exactly what we are trying to achieve at this committee. And these bills support effective teachers, create new, great classrooms, ensure that every child receives the best education possible. We had an opportunity to discuss these and vote on it, but we didn't, which is why we were pushed off the study session. And this is why we're doing it, to see the merits of these bills coming back, because they truly believe, I mean, these are the bills that deserve a vote. So that's why we're doing it. Let's study it and see the merits of bringing back in January when we all come back. But procedurally, I believe when we were talking about the deadline, Chairman, I think the deadline is not in the Assembly rules, is it? It is in the purview of the chair of the committee, and that is you, Chairman. So I don't want to argue about the procedures here, but this is exactly why we're having it, and there is clearly an issue of denial of what's happening out in the field. And I would like to ask respectfully, Chair, when we have a presenter presenting us about their bill, can we not interrupt? Because I'm very much interested in hearing what they have to say to present their arguments to us before we start getting into bantering on discussing and arguing on what. So I think we will have plenty of opportunity for question and answer. So I would respectfully ask you, Chairman, to let's hold off on questioning the witness until they had the opportunity to present what they have to present to us.
I appreciate that, but I have questions and I want to get them answered, and that's part of what this hearing is all about, I would argue. With that, Ms. Olson.
Oh.
Yes, Dr. Weber had a question.
Oh, Dr. Weber, I apologize.
That's okay. Quick comments. I'm pleased also that we're having this interim hearing. I really didn't even know it was taking place until almost the last minute, and I just happened to be in Sacramento today doing business upstairs. You know, I think one of the challenges here, and I think it would have been nice to hear it, maybe it's somewhere in the interim study, as to whether or not how many of the districts actually drill down into the language or do the default method in terms of really looking to see are they using all these options, or are they really just falling back on the default because of either contract language, or it's easier to do in terms of when you have layoff. I know if you have large districts, sometimes it's very easy to do the layoff in terms of seniority, and that's what happens. That's there. Also, I think we have to realize that the default, the language that's listed here, really does not address the issue, I think, that is being introduced here, and that is the interest of effectiveness versus qualifications. And I think that was brought up, that this language is about qualifications. And I do know that occasionally districts will look, if they have a highly specialized curriculum at a school, maybe it's a curriculum that has a career focus or something, and they need individuals to teach that particular subject. They make exceptions for that. But they oftentimes don't make exceptions if it's a question of, do you have the same credential to teach history versus someone else's credential to teach history? All these people teach history. Seldom do we look to say, is this a get fit for the school? Is this a person being effective in terms of really helping students? Is, you know, those kinds of things. But we have a tendency to use the language here strictly for credentialing purposes, to make sure that they have the right credential or the right expertise for a classroom, but not necessarily the effectiveness of the individual in teaching those classes. And I think we've all had situations in our districts where we've had absolutely innovative teachers. You know, I've had parents complain that one teacher who really turned kids on, who got them learning, who was energizing the curriculum and the students, was the person laid off. They'd been there less than someone else who had not. And that's an ongoing challenge I think we face, and I think this gets at it, and it may challenge our districts to do a little bit more in terms of looking at it if they really start talking about effectiveness and instead of just credential, because credentials don't always equal effectiveness in terms of our teachers that are there. So I think it raises an important issue that is not found in law with regards to not just the credential, but the effectiveness, because we sometimes assume that credentials equal effectiveness, but it really doesn't. And I think all of us in our careers have seen folks with the same credentials, but with different effects in classrooms. Our kids have had it in classrooms and others where everybody there had the same either elementary credential or math, whatever it was, certification, and yet there were some more effective than others. And how do you get to that? And that always lies also with the evaluation systems that we have, whether or not they're doing the correct job of helping folks arrive at a higher level of effectiveness that needs to be there. So I appreciate the comments, and I looked at this several times, the Ed Code, and I thought, well, it really doesn't talk about that. It talks about credentialing, and I've been a part of districts over the years when we've had lots of layoffs and cutoffs that most of it revolved around seniority. Be very honest, I think most districts do, and only when we had situations where we did have a kind of curriculum that was differentiated or something special did we have someone make a special case for that, and we did that. But as a practice, we just kind of took all the history people and you kind of laid off some, and you took all the language and those kind of things, but we didn't drill down at anything else unless it was a specialized curriculum that needed a very specialized certification. And once again, it was certification based. So if we had 5 people who could do this job, the one with the greatest seniority got the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Good to see you all. I look forward to seeing you on a more regular basis when we all return in January. I really appreciate you holding this interim study hearing today, because I truly believe there is perhaps no more important issue facing the state of California than the state of our education system. And achieving educational excellence, I know, is every single one of our goals, and we have got to work together to figure out how to do that. And so I was really pleased to hear you say, Mr. Chairman, that you're interested in showing ineffective teachers the door. And if you're serious about that, I very much look forward to working with you. I will carry a joint bill with you, because today that's not the case. It takes tens of thousands of dollars and many times, oftentimes years on end, before that's able to be achieved by districts. So I look forward to carrying that bill with you if you're serious about that in this coming year. The fact is, over the last 2 years, we have funded our schools with an additional $10 billion. And I'm a supporter of that. I am known as an advocate, and my record proves I am an advocate for public education. I want our schools to be places that are great environments for our teachers to work in, and great environments where our students can learn and excel and start to prepare for success not only in school but in the workplace and in life. But the fact is, if we've invested an additional $10 billion in our school system in California in the last 2 years, I as a lawmaker, I as a parent, I as a Californian want to see what we've achieved as a result of that additional $10 billion investment. And I'll tell you, I look at our schools today compared to 2 years ago, and I don't see any difference. We have some great schools, we have some failing schools, we have some great classrooms, we have some failing classrooms, but all of them should be better today than they were 2 years ago if funding alone led to higher student achievement outcomes. And the fact is, there's no difference. We continue to rank 46th out of 50 states in the nation for educational excellence. That is unacceptable. We are failing an entire generation of students. And what that means is, for the long term, we're failing California's economy by not insisting that we both fund our schools and fix our schools. And that's why we're here today. Because at its best, an excellent K-12 system prepares our students to be future leaders in a robust economy where the middle class can grow and rise and pursue their goals and dreams. But unfortunately, California has not reached that goal. As I said, our state currently ranks 46th in the nation. And I saw one ranking a couple weeks ago that ranked us 50th, 50 out of 50 states. And we used to be the state with premier schools that everybody wanted to come to for a quality education. Our poverty rate is 23.4%, the highest in the nation. And the human toll of these statistics translate into 8.9 million of our friends and neighbors across the state struggling under the weight of poverty. And we all know, because it's not what we just know, but history has proven and statistics have proven that the key to alleviating poverty, strengthening the middle class, preparing students for the workforce, and empowering our youth to fully engage in the modern economy starts with providing a quality, excellent education. That is why my colleagues and I have introduced the Great Schools for California package to level the education playing field in a way that benefits all children, regardless of their zip code. In an effort to avoid casting no votes on these worthy, important bills, the chairman and other members of this education committee invoked an obscure procedure that sent these bills to this interim study. And it truly saddens me that here we are 3 weeks before the end of interim, 2 weeks before Christmas, when people are out busy preparing for the holidays, that we're holding a hearing when nobody is paying attention. Our kids deserve better than that from us. Our kids deserve Republicans and Democrats working together to fix our schools. 7 months ago, these bills were sent to interim study, and today is the first day we've heard anything about them since. So we are eager to discuss these education issues with this committee today. I am very sincere, and I think my record shows I have a bipartisan working history where I want to work with all members of this committee, all members of the legislature, to get this important work done. And so this year, my bill in particular, as you know, I was proud to present to this committee AB 1078 related to teacher evaluations. I have worked on this issue for a number of years, and this bill would have updated and required full implementation of the existing teacher evaluation law known as the Stoll Act. And it's not bad, but it needs to be modernized. It needs to be improved for the sake of our kids. The Stoll Act was passed in 1971 to provide school districts with a timeline for teacher evaluations and to designate the importance of peer review and student academic performance in these evaluations. However, the Act lacks definition and guidelines, and school districts have largely ignored its provisions up and down the state. This year, EdVoice released a report entitled Student Progress Ignored, an examination of California school districts' compliance with the Stoll Act, which found that a majority of districts do not formally assess whether or not a student is actually learning. And in fact, when considering the job performance of that student's teacher. And even more telling, 86.5% of school districts, almost 90% of school districts, did not include any connection to pupil progress at all in their evaluations. Furthermore, the Act lacks opportunity for teacher growth because it only provides 2 assessment categories, satisfactory and unsatisfactory. And as the members of this committee, I believe, know, I come from a family of public school teachers. They want meaningful evaluations that allow them to improve and excel in their career and master their craft. AB 1078 would improve teacher evaluations by modernizing the Stoll Act to develop meaningful teacher evaluations that will help both teachers and students continue on the path of success. AB 1078 would require the State Board of Education to update teacher evaluation guidelines by July 1st, 2016. It requires annual teacher evaluations to result in 4 categories of determinations: highly effective, effective, minimally effective, or ineffective. It encourages school districts to use peer evaluation and surveys of parents and students as part of the evaluation and assessment guidelines. It prohibits, and this is a really important piece that's missing in the Stoll Act, and that is a consequence for districts that don't comply. So this prohibits the Board of Education from granting any waiver requested by a school district if that district becomes out of compliance with the Stoll Act as updated by the State Board. And then finally, it upholds current collective bargaining agreements. So if a district has a collective bargaining agreement in place with a robust teacher evaluation system, or with any teacher evaluation system for that matter, this bill respects that process already. California has an enormous amount of talent when it comes to our educators. Our teachers deserve to work in an environment that allows them to grow and excel. And our students deserve the opportunity to learn from effective teachers. A study earlier this year by Teach Plus, because we often hear the myth that these are anti-teacher bills. They absolutely are not. A study earlier this year by Teach Plus found that 66% of teachers, public school teachers, believe that there are teachers at their current school who they think are ineffective and need additional training and assistance. We should be providing that additional training and assistance. But we can't do that if we don't have an effective evaluation system in place to determine who those teachers are. 70% of teachers, according to the same Teach Plus survey, 70% of teachers believe that district support for an ineffective teacher should be limited to 2 years before that ineffective teacher is shown the door. That's not happening in our system today. Education is the great equalizer. Growing poverty erodes the middle class and places the California dream further out of reach. But with quality education, we can change that in all the different geographic regions of our state. With good teachers, there is no limit to what our children can achieve. And there is no limit to what our children will be able to provide for the strength of our economy. By creating more meaningful teacher assessments, AB 1078 would propel both teachers and students forward on their paths to success. There is still time to give California the opportunity to once again become a leader in education, which in turn will better prepare my kids, your kids, and all of California's students for success in school, in the workplace, and in life. But we must act now. Education complacency is not an option that we, as parents, as lawmakers, or as society can afford. So I encourage an actual vote on AB 1078, on Ms. Baker's LIFO bill, on Rocky Chavez's teacher tenure bill as just the beginning of developing a robust education system in California that places our students as the foremost priority and that also provides our teachers excellent environments in which to work. One last thing that I'll end on, and I'm happy to answer any questions. It was suggested that only one of the three authors has requested an actual hearing for a vote because we would think it's really important that we vote on these bills. But I can tell you, according to my staff, that is in fact not accurate. The very day my staff received the letters suggesting that we schedule our bills for a hearing in January for a vote, my staff contacted the committee on that very day and asked for that and even followed up a couple of weeks later. So we have put our request in for an actual vote on the bill. If we have not done so properly, please let us know. We know the bills currently sit in Rules Committee, but it is absolutely our understanding that we have requested a vote on AB 1078 when we all return to the legislature in January. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Seeing no questions, thank you, Ms. Olson.
Thank you. I look forward to carrying that bill with you and to a vote on this bill.
Okay. Mr. Chavez.
I get to move down from the big table to the little one. Here we go. Well, Mr. O'Donnell, I'm really looking forward to the next phase, and as I already discussed, I have the fortune of AB 1248 will have a hearing in January. I'd just like to clarify some points. My bill is not about tenure. As you know, there's no such thing as that. We have probationary, then permanent status.
Correct.
So my bill is about permanent status. I also would like to clarify a point, because I'm one who likes to keep to his word. Last time when we had this bill heard, with their discussion, I said, if there's anybody who would like to work with me to make this bill more palatable to get through and discuss it, how to make it work, I'd be willing to do that. It was to that end, in the 24th of November, I made a request to the CTA to actually meet with me and work with me to make sure this could go through. Sadly, it was only today at 1 p.m. I got a message to my staff that said, I'm sorry, we were busy, we couldn't meet with you, I'll be at a hearing this afternoon. I highlight that because I want to have a dialogue with whomever wants to do this to deal with the issue of how long from a probationary to a permanent status. Right now we know it's 2 years. I would like to take it to 3 years. Status, you know, there's a lot of different statistics out there, the appropriate time, 4 years, 5 years. I don't think this is a big step, but this is clearly the objective, Mr. O'Donnell. This is clearly the objective. to ensure that we have a proper environment and education for the development and success of young people to become the best teachers they can be. That's what I'm trying to do. So either 2 years or 3 years or whatever. If you would be willing to help me work with that, you don't have to answer me here. I'll have this hearing in January, but I will bring this up again in a public forum. I'm willing to work with you. Work with me. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Yeah, with that, we'll what we'll do is we'll call up the three presenters. We're going to move to researcher scholar perspectives on these topics. We'll bring up Dr. Dan Goldhaber. He's from the University of Washington at Bothell, I don't know how you say that, I apologize. And we'll also bring up Dr. Julia Kopich from Julia Kopich and Associates, and Dr. Ken Futternick, Director of School Turnaround Center from Wested. So those are going to be our three panelists. We'll have Dr. Dan Goldhaber go first, please. And then we'll have Ms. Kopich and then Dr. Futternick. And if I slaughtered your names, I completely apologize. Correct me. Get your red pen out and correct me now.
All right.
Please.
Thank you, Chairman O'Donnell and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the layoff process and how that relates to student achievement. So my name is Dan Goldhaber, and I am the director of the Center for Education Data and Research at the University of Washington, Bothell. So that was pretty good. And I'm also the director of Calder at the American Institutes for Research. My research focuses broadly on educational productivity and teacher quality, and I was an expert in the Vergara trial. So I'm going to describe a couple of studies, but I guess at the outset I want to say two things. I want to say that it is rare that I find issues where empirical research is pretty unanimous in terms of the finding and suggests something that's pretty clear for what is best for students. And I actually think that in this case, with regards to a seniority-based versus a system that considers teacher effectiveness or teacher quality, that we actually have such a case, and the findings are actually in line with what you'd probably expect just as parents and observers of schools, in that if you have a quality blind personnel system, then that is probably not in the best interests of student achievement. So there are, at least to my knowledge, 3 studies that have appeared in peer-reviewed journals that kind of speak to this issue, and I'm going to walk through those studies and hopefully not take my full 10 minutes so that there's a little extra time preserved for questions. The first study is by Don Boyd and Hamp Langford and Jim Wyckoff and Susanna Loeb, and they simulate different layoffs in New York City. So they use actual data from New York City, and they say this is before we entered into the Great Recession, and there were teachers that were actually getting laid off, but you could see it was coming. So they said, okay, what would you do if you used a seniority, if you needed to make a 5% reduction in your budget and you used a seniority-only system to make the reduction in the teacher workforce, which teachers would get laid off, and which teachers would get laid off if you achieved the same budgetary savings, but you laid teachers off based on value-added effectiveness instead. And so they compared the different teachers, and they looked at the implications for student achievement. And what they found out is that under a seniority-only system, that you would lay off more teachers because, of course, you're laying off the most junior teachers who earn less, and that there were big implications for student achievement. 26% of a standard deviation of student test scores on the New York State test. In a second, I'm going to tell you what that sort of means in more lay terms. So then I did a study with Roddy Theobald in using data from Washington State. And this is a couple years down the line. So we actually see that teachers are getting layoff notices. So we looked at the teachers that were getting layoff notices, and we assessed what is the criterion upon which the layoffs are based. And they were very clearly based on seniority in Washington State, which is not surprising because the collective bargaining agreements in Washington State all look a lot like the California Code, in that they say that you have to use seniority as the primary criterion, but there are some exceptions that you can make based on your area of endorsement, certification, special skill sets, etc. And what we found is that there was a big differential between those teachers that would have been laid off under a seniority, under the existing criterion, and the teachers that you would lay off if you were using an effectiveness-based criterion, 20% of a standard deviation of student achievement. So the fact that the state was using a seniority-based criterion means that it was not laying off the most ineffective teachers. So those are the teachers that, of course, are still in the classroom. So let me just say what does this 26% of a standard deviation mean? So typically, students in the mid to late elementary grades, they gain between 3/4 and a standard deviation of achievement on tests. So this is about, a third, a quarter of what students typically gain throughout a year. What we calculated is that in Washington State, the differential between the teachers that would be laid off under an effectiveness-based criterion versus a seniority or the existing criterion was worth about 2.5 to 3.5 months of student learning. The other way that I can kind of put it in context is that teachers typically get better early on in their career, and the difference between a teacher who's a novice, a first year, an average teacher who's a novice, and an average teacher with, say, 5 years of experience is about 5% of a standard deviation of student achievement. So the difference between these two groups of teachers was 4 times as large as the difference between a novice teacher and, a fifth or above teacher. So my point here is that's a really, to my mind, educationally significant, large difference. So the other things that we found were that there was a disparate impact on the two different ways that you could lay off teachers, that when you used a seniority-based layoff, that you tended to lay more teachers off in high-poverty schools, in schools serving more classrooms serving minority students. Again, not terribly surprising when you look at the distribution of novice teachers in Washington State, or really in any state where I've actually looked at the data, that you tend to see a lot more turnover in schools serving needy populations, so that the teachers tend to be more junior. So it's not surprising that those are the teachers that would be targeted for a layoff under a seniority-based system. And then lastly, consistent with the New York study, we found that you would lay off about 10% more teachers under a seniority-based system than under an effectiveness-based system. Okay, so when I had testified in Vergara, those were the primary empirical studies that had been done that spoke directly to this issue. Since then, there's another study that's come out by Matt Kraft, and it's based on layoffs that occurred in Charlotte-Mecklenburg in North Carolina. And what's interesting about this study is that Charlotte-Mecklenburg did not have to adhere to a seniority system. So he was able to look at what was the criterion upon which layoffs occurred, and seniority was one of the things that looked like it mattered, but it was clearly not the only thing, and it was clearly not the driving factor as it was in my study in Washington. And he was able to look at the consequences of layoffs in Charlotte-Mecklenburg under the system where they could use some discretion and consider teacher effectiveness, and if they had to adhere to a seniority-based system. And again, the study is pretty consistent with these other studies that I've mentioned, that if you use a seniority-only based system, you're basically not, to my mind, doing right by students. So I think that the Charlotte Mecklenburg case is interesting because it's the first case where there's sort of a concrete alternative to a seniority-only system. So in conclusion, again, I think the research is pretty consistent, that if student achievement is your primary concern, that you wouldn't rely solely on seniority. I thank you for the opportunity to present this work, and I am happy to entertain questions.